It's late, and one of those nights. We all know them. It has been almost 8 years since I last heard her voice, and I can't seem to be able to function. To begin, this isn't the first time I've written this out. I've been doing it since I was really young, but I want to attempt it again. I had a cousin, more like a sister, and we were inseparable. There was nothing we didn't do together. It was us against the world, and I felt my strongest with her. I had never had anyone like her in my life, and so when she was taken from me, everything in my world shattered. Here's some background. I was born in 1999. I had 3 older brothers and a single mom, so not having any other girls around, I linked with my cousin. She was born in 2000. She had a dad, a mom, and an older sister. Their perfect little family. I was always there with them, their other daughter in their imperfect world. This story doesn't truly begin until 2012. It was a bad year for my cousin's family. Lots of lies, issues, my aunt moving out, my cousin's sister going to college. It was just me and her against everything. I was 13 and depressed. She was the glue holding my shattering life together, but only for problems that seem so little now. Her dad did all he could for her. Even when she was bullied and began to self-harm, he moved her skulls and would sit with her at lunch, things I didn't find out till it was too late. But that only gives you background on them, not of the exact story. August 28th, forever being marked on my calendars. It was a Tuesday, but to truly understand everything, I need to begin on August 24th. It was a Friday. I was picked up from home. My uncle told my mom it would be our last hurrah before I began junior high in September. We stayed at my grandparents'. We recorded a video that I found would be the last time we would do that, the last thing I would ever have her voice in. We did things normal 11 and 13-year-olds do, especially those in 2012. Sunday night, we went back to her house. I can't remember much about that day. Nothing really happened. So I'll skip to August 27th, the day before everything happened. My uncle owned a painting company, which I found out much later was bankrupt, and a lot was happening. He told my cousin and her mom he got them a new house. He showed them this new house. It was closer to my cousin's school, so he wouldn't need to drive her every day. It was going to be better. We spent that night packing up her room, going through all her things. Her mother and father enjoying their company, me and my cousin also enjoying each other. I remember my uncle preparing us whatever food they had left in their freezer, which was freezer-burnt tater tots. Her parents went to bed soon after, but not me and her. We stayed up for hours. Our laptop screens illuminating our faces, our laughs filling the silent night air. The happiness of 2 young girls being the end to a good night. We slept in her living room wrapped in sleeping bags, and here's where things began to shift. Around 4 a.m., my uncle came out. We were still awake, but pretending to be asleep, and he knew this. He turned on the fan that sat at our feet, a very important note, and told us we needed to go to bed or else my aunt might come out very upset. We did. We were tired anyway and didn't feel the need to be up anymore. Around 7 or 8 a.m., I was woken up by my uncle. He stated that I was going to be driven home. I believe my mom had asked him, considering I was getting a haircut for orientation the next day on the 29th. I got up, going back to my cousin's room, which lay directly next to my aunt and uncle's, and grabbed my things. The entire time I felt eyes on me, and when I looked down the hall to the living room, I saw my uncle staring at me, his head around the corner as to spy on me. When he noticed me, he quickly moved back, but I was sleep-deprived and a child, so I didn't think anything of it. He asked me so many times if I was ready to go. I was not, so I said no, going at my usual pace of packing my things up. When I was finally ready, I walked to the side of the couch and saw my sleepy cousin peering up at me, and I waved goodbye, assuming she would stay home and sleep, something her father usually did because my aunt was at work. After this, I made my way to the car. The doors were locked, and I was stuck standing half asleep with 2 bags in the cold morning air. One thing I did notice, though, was my aunt's purse still lying in the front seat. I was shocked as she was at work and never left her purse anywhere. This thought quickly left my mind when I saw my cousin walking out. Black shorts, white t-shirt, bedhead, a Steelers blanket, as my uncle loved them, and a pillow. She rubbed her eyes as she came out, and I was excited to see her coming along for the ride. I believe she was too. Once my uncle came out and I loaded my things into the trunk, we headed to my apartment, roughly 20 minutes to a half-hour away. Our car ride was filled with giggling and happiness as we sang to songs like Whistle by Flo Rida, our favorite song at the time. But my uncle continued to behave oddly. He was insistent about turning down the music and turning up the heat, something I still find odd and something my cousin noticed and asked him to stop doing. We wanted to be happy, not knowing this was our last time. When we reached my apartment, I climbed out and so did my uncle. He ran up the stairs to go to the restroom, and this left me and my cousin able to talk about seeing her that Friday night. I would be coming back over on Thursday because Friday they were going to be putting down their very elderly dog, and I was going to comfort my cousin as they did this. My last words to her were, "Shut up, you're so dumb. Bye." As I slammed the trunk of their car, once I had grabbed my bags, I passed my uncle on the stairs, who said nothing to me. Not a goodbye, not a see you later, nothing. The last image I have of my 11-year-old cousin is her lying down in the back seat, head on her pillow and wrapped in her blanket. And that, like everything, was poofed into thin air. All of these events were on August 28th, the same day I cut my hair short for the first time, the first day I met my godmother's newborn baby, the same day I lost my childhood completely. August 29th started usually. I did my hair for my ASB card for school. I put on my favorite new outfit my mom bought me. I got to wear my new shoes and felt so happy. I attended my school's orientation, and it was usual. A new school, new teachers, but old friends. After it was done, my mom needed to go back to work, so I went home with my friend. Her dad also needed to go back to work, so he left us at her house alone. We walked all around our small town, messing around, buying things we didn't need. Around noon, or maybe a little later, my friend and I sat at a little park near her house. It was empty, so we, being two teenage girls, played on the big toy, talked about school and boys, and did the usual stuff. Until I decided to call my mom. I called her to joke with her, to say, "How's work? I'm getting to spend time outside in the sun while you're at work," poking fun. I even star 67'd her, for God's sake. When she answered the phone and I let out the initial hello in a fake voice, her voice interrupted through the speakers. "Where are you, Lily? Where are you?" She had checked my friend's house and I was gone. She couldn't find us. I told her I was at the park. I screamed to the phone. "Mom, what's going on? Mom, please, tell me what's going on." I thought my guinea pig had died or my grandma had fallen. She wouldn't answer me. She hung up the phone and moments later she pulled up to the park. She jumped so quickly from her car and began to scream, "They're dead. Violet and Christy, they're dead. He killed them. Dean killed them." All I could say was, "What?" As I heard her words, time felt as though it were standing still. When she grabbed me, we fell, both crying. After this, my friend told us she would walk home, not understanding what was going on. I barely understood, but she didn't understand what my mom had said. It wasn't until later that night that I found out that I was in the home. He shot my aunt to death, and shortly after, my cousin and I fell asleep. They say that a pillow and him turning on the fan caused it to be muffled enough that neither of us woke up. In the morning, when he had woken me up, he watched me walk around the house in fear of me stepping into their room, revealing my aunt's bloodied body lying in bed, still as if it were asleep. This is also why he woke my cousin up and packed her into the car. After he had dropped me off at home, he told the police that he drove around for quite a while, watching my cousin in the back seat, wanting her to go to sleep. When she finally did, he pulled into a neighborhood that wasn't yet built in the middle of farmlands, rolled down her window, and took her life like he took my aunt's. I pray every day she was truly asleep. and her last sight wasn't her father holding a gun to her. Once he'd done this, he drove home. Once home, he picked her body up, wrapped in that bright yellow Steelers blanket, and carried her inside, laying her in bed with her mother, both still seeming to be asleep beside the bullet holes and blood. He waited until the next day to turn himself in, sitting by the waterfront until feeling ready to, the same waterfront he had taken me and my cousin to for some ice cream and a day playing on the docks. He walked into the police station and confessed what he had done. He stated he had killed his wife and daughter. When they arrived at the house, it was confirmed that the only thing they could see through the windows were 2 bodies lying in the bed of the master bedroom. My mother recounts to me, begging him to keep me with them until she was off of work and then she'd come and get me, and he told her no. He refused and said he was dropping me off at home. She was angry and ultimately hung up the phone, not realizing that this was him granting me the life he had just taken from 2 other people. Later on, my mother visited him, asking him many questions, but asked him why he didn't take me too. He said, "She wasn't mine to take." Burying that thought in the mind of a 13-year-old girl. So many thoughts rushed through my head. He emptied the bullet casing into the trash can I had thrown trash into that morning. I had walked by the door where my aunt's body now laid, and if I had opened it for any reason, I might not be here. He kept the gun in the car with me and my cousin, knowing what his intentions were that day, knowing what was going to happen next. I don't know if the fan was intentional or my aunt's purse in the car, but I do know he didn't plan on taking me. I realize now I didn't mention completely why he had done it. My aunt had committed adultery and had done horrible things, which I am not saying she deserved death for. His company was going under. The new house lined up was a lie. So many lies piling up, and at that moment, this felt like the right way out for him. There's so many sides to this story. My cousin's sister was left without a family. Thankfully, my uncle was her stepfather, so she did have her dad left. My grandparents on that side of the family no longer speak to me. None of that family does, and I believe it's because I resented a lot of them. I don't consider my side to be the saddest. I just know I'm a survivor and the living witness and one of the last people my cousin and aunt saw before their lives were so abruptly ended. For anyone concerned, her dog did end up getting euthanized later and cremated and mixed with my aunt's ashes. I will include articles, and some I am labeled as a friend or cousin because I was a minor at the time, and as details were being released, they didn't have their story straight. Everything you're hearing here is the same details I had to tell 2 detectives as I chipped off my Union Jack nail stickers as I sat in my small room. They said I was the strongest young girl they had ever met because I didn't cry, and I remember everything incredibly well. I'm sorry the story is so long. This is the most detail I had ever provided before, and I wanted it out there, finally somewhere public instead of stuck in my brain. I have shared this with other YouTubers, and it's never been picked up, and I knew people here would read it, so here you go. I'm a female from Sydney, Australia. I live in a very quiet neighborhood. Nothing interesting really ever happens around here, and everyone usually keeps to themselves. So you can probably imagine everyone's shock when something as terrible as this happened. I was 14 at the time. This happened back in 2018 when my mom and I were going for our daily afternoon walks with my dog when we heard loud bangs that sounded like gunshots. We looked at each other but shrugged it off as some sort of construction work. In Australia, we have strict gun laws and guns are not common, especially not in my area. About 2 minutes after the bangs, a white ute sped past us down the street we were walking along going about 80 kilometers in a 50-kilometer zone. We looked at each other again, but soon forgot about it and made our way home quickly. I was in my bedroom when I kept hearing helicopters and the constant wailings of police and ambulance sirens. I went to ask my dad what was going on, and he told me that a helicopter kept circling around our house with a spotlight, like they were looking for something, or someone. I could see its spotlight constantly drifting over my yard and illuminating it. We turned on the news and my heart dropped. All the channels were reporting that 2 teenagers on the street opposite mine had been shot dead in their home by their father, who fled the scene. I instantly connected the dots of the gunshots and the speeding ute that was speeding directly away from that house. It chilled me that me and my mom had been walking along that street peacefully, unaware of the massacre that had just happened, that we had just shrugged off all the signs unwittingly. We figured that the helicopter was circling around my house as it backed onto a creek covered in bush, and they were looking for the father. My dad kept all the backyard lights on so we could see everything and locked every window and door. I didn't sleep at all that night, knowing the murderer, their father, could be in this area somewhere. Throughout the night, I noticed my parents looking at me concerned, and at first figured it was because they were afraid this man was still in the area still and had some sort of hostility towards all teenagers. But then it occurred to me that they were not just worried about my safety. They were worried I knew this person, that this was one of my friends. At this point, as it was only an hour or so after the incident, the victims had not been named. The closest thing we had to identification was the video of the mother hysterically crying and being treated, which still sends chills down my spine just thinking about. After the whole night of searching for the father and everyone terrified of where he was, they found him in the morning in an apartment 10 minutes away, already dead, as he had shot himself. The reality of it all came rushing in the next morning when the children were identified. A 13-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy. It was revealed that the boy went to my high school. He was in the year above me. When I saw their faces and I recognized the boy, the sadness was soon overcome with numbness and denial. Because this felt like something out of a movie, as selfish as it sounds, I was also so immensely relieved it wasn't one of my friends. Just recognizing him was enough to send me spiraling down a dark hole. He was a part of the group that sat next to my friend group at lunches. He was always very quiet. He always seemed a little out of place. It came out that his parents were fighting over custody in court. I suppose the father had the mindset of, if I can't have them, no one can. And that sickens me to the core. It was almost worse seeing the face of the father. I cannot look at it without physically shivering. There is a vague recognition when I see his face, but I can never place where from. It was the only face that has ever truly haunted me. School resumed as usually as it could the next day. There was such a heaviness in the air, like it drained you of any emotion but despair. Time seemed irrelevant. The day went slow yet fast. No one really spoke, but you could tell there were wars going on in their minds. We had an assembly and our principal told us to avoid the reporters who were all crowded outside of our school. The teachers let us go early before the bell so the reporters would not be prepared. I had already seen the news vans and reporters outside the house while driving to school. I walked home the long way to avoid them. It was the highlight of the news for weeks. New things coming out, how the brothers seemed to have protected his little sister in his final moments. That report made me sob just from the title. I only went to that house to place flowers outside, which so many others had done. I don't walk down that street anymore. Something that haunts me is the fact that this boy who sat near me during lunches had such a traumatic life, and we were all oblivious to it. He was just another mere presence in our school, and only when it was gone were people aware of it. I walked past him every day, unknowing that this would be his end, that I would hear the gunshots that ended his life. The fact that the father was still able to get his hands on guns legally, even with all the strict laws in Australia, is terrifying. The evidence shows he was planning on doing this for months. This was not the first nor the last time there had been a death within my school, as just recently my friend passed too. But it never fails to amaze me just how quickly everyone gets over these things and how everything just kind of goes back to normal. Something that causes the world to fall apart for a person does not stop the rest of the world from spinning. If there was someone I truly pitied in all of this, it would of course be the mother. She lost everything she had in one night. It was said she was seeking help through all of this. I saw the house be put up for sale and sold. It looked like she was moving on, though this is not really something anyone could move on from. Around 6 months later, she was found dead in the same house she lost her children, as she had taken her own life. It saddens me to think she dealt with all that suffering for months, only to succumb to it. A few years back, I was a shift manager for my local big box pharmacy/convenience store. It was right across my backyard, and I could sprint there in under a minute if I really wanted to, so it worked for me. I was 30, though I looked about 19. I worked out a lot, and while I was fit, I was a smaller girl. Even though I was married, I did constantly get hit on and asked out. It was flattering, but always made me feel awkward, and I promise I'm not being narcissistic, just building the scene. Now, this particular store I worked at was in a weird part of town. On the right side of town to attract the Karens, but close enough to the not-so-good side of town to attract the addicts, drunks, and psychopaths, though I guess some of that is just in part of working for a pharmacy. Let me say I'm not someone that scares easily. I've had some high on meth crash their car into the side of our store, causing the back of our store to bend inward because we didn't carry pineapple juice, and had a man pick me up, throw me over his shoulder, and start walking out the door with me saying, "You'd make a good wife." So, yeah. It started on a Sunday morning. I remember this because I was busy building end caps and making sales signs. I was with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by, and I was really bubbly. A man and his son came into the store and they made a beeline for me. The man was probably not quite 6 feet and skinny. He had dreadlocks, a long, skinny, silver earring dangling from his ear, and this tan trench coat that I found odd because it was summer. I greeted them and asked if they needed some help. He spoke with a thick Jamaican accent and said his GPS stopped working, like those old ones before they were standard in our phones, and wanted to see if we had any. I let out a small laugh, thinking he was messing with me. "No, that would be at Best Buy or something, but we have a small section of electronics on this wall." I indicated to the wall in the back of me. "Oh, thanks," he said, taking a look but also keeping his eyes on me. Something about them just chilled me. He was speaking another language to his son, but I keep going about my tasks for the day. He would call me to help him, asking questions about chargers and SD cards. I answered them. Then he started telling me how beautiful I was. I thanked him awkwardly. "You must work out, yeah?" he said. Yoga mostly," I replied, getting more and more uncomfortable. He made more comments about my body, telling me he loved my tattoos and was just generally being a creep. I tried to stay polite and eventually just walked away to do busy work. I avoided him, but he was still staring at me. He had his phone out, and I kept hearing the shuddering of a camera. I went to the office, telling my other coworker that I thought the guy was taking my picture and just making me uncomfortable. He came out and watched over me. The creepy man and his son left shortly after my coworker came out. By the time the end of my shift came, I forgot about the creep. A few busy weeks later, I was up front ringing customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked her. "I don't know. A man in dreadlocks told me to give it to you." I took the envelope and went into my office. There were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. My heart sank. I had no idea these were taken. Most of them were me in the store working, and some of me walking home, and some with me and my daughter. I felt sick. There was a note with it. It said something along the lines of, "You're so beautiful. I'm in love with you. I'd be a better husband than what you have right now. Please give me a chance." There was more to it, but it's in police evidence now. The guy stupidly left his name and address. I called our store manager and the police. They took our camera footage, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They told him he needed to stay away from me or next time he would be arrested and he was banned from the store. I was relieved, but still a bit bothered by it. A few more weeks to a month went by. It was another busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty and another coworker as my cashier. We were ringing together when I noticed a man staring at me. This man was tall with a medium build. He had dreadlocks and the same silver earring and long tan trench coat as the other man did. This man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and dead and angry. They were staring through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase, just stood and stared. I tried to smile politely at him, then another wave of customers came. I got lost in helping everyone, but didn't see the man anymore. When it calmed down, I still didn't see him. I decided to go, start facing the back of the store, and told my coworker to call if she needed me. As I was back there, I heard that Jamaican accent an aisle over. I looked up at the mirror to see the scary man on the phone. Yes, she's here. No, just one other girl with her. I can grab her when she leaves, no problem. I was horrified. He didn't see me, so I slowly made my way to the front. I briefly tell my coworker what's going on, then call the police and my store manager, and the cops took him away. A few days later, a detective came to speak to me. The two men were brothers. They were abducting women and using them for human trafficking. He told me I was very lucky, and I later found out that they had found a woman beaten to death in their apartment, and they have both since gone to prison. This still gives me nightmares. That woman easily could have been me. I'm a Hispanic female, Mexican to be exact, and this happened on my family's ranch just last night. My family consists of my parents, me, and my little brother. My other brother is at basic training right now for the Air Force, so for now it's just us. I wanted to just sit down and get this all out while I can. I live in New Mexico, the southeastern part right on the Texas state line, like literally 10 minutes east and you're in Texas. Anyways, I live 15 miles outside of my hometown and 8 miles away from the town over. My family has a cattle ranch and I live just off the highway. So people coming on our ranch are usually people we know. I think I live in the safest place anyone could possibly live, with little to no worries about someone wanting to cause my family and I harm. Well, last night proved me wrong. Let me briefly explain the layout to my place. We have the main entrance with the ranch name and cattle ground. Then to the right, a few hundred feet over, is the gate we use for the cattle when they're being moved. But once you come onto our land, we have a giant silver barn, and attached to it is an overstay house where workers would go and stay overnight during harvesting seasons. Then it's my house a little ways away, about a 2 to 3 minute walk. Anyways, my mom's cousin from Mexico is renting the overstay house from my parents while he works here in the U.S. for privacy reasons. His name will be Antonio for the story. So last night at around 8 p.m. it was thunderstorming when Antonio heard a knock at the door. "Come in," he said, assuming it was either my mom or dad, but no. In walked in a dirty-looking white man about 5'9", with a goatee that was obviously tweaking and talking really fast, which really scared Antonio, seeing as he doesn't speak English. So Antonio calls my dad and told him, "Hey, there's some white man here in my apartment and I don't know what he wants or how to get him out." Right away, my dad drives to the apartment with his gun and demanded to know what business that man had on our land. "They told me to come here and talk to you." "Who sent you to come to talk to me?" "It was a talking dog. He wanted me to warn you all that the world is going to end and your dogs are talking to me." Referring to my two dogs, Sheba and Sombra, who were barking and growling at him like crazy. "Look, friend, I think it's best you get off my property." Yeah, I should leave." He then proceeds to hop the cattle guard gate, and my dad calls the sheriff's department, explaining what was happening and that if this man didn't get off of our property, My dad was going to make sure he doesn't leave it breathing. After this phone call, my dad and Antonio are just looking at the man on the other side of the gate. He was flailing his arms around like tweakers do and talking at the top of his lungs. Then he did the most ungodly thing. He started screaming demonically, then proceeded to run down the highway. Once the police arrived, they told my dad they had gotten calls about him, and apparently he lived close by to our ranching community. Great. We have a crackhead neighbor. My dad just told him he better not come onto our property again because my dad said he doesn't know him and he's not welcome. He doesn't know his intentions and he's not scared to shoot him if any of us feel threatened. The sheriffs then left and everyone got ready for bed. Then early this morning at around 3 a.m., Antonio called my dad again, panicked because the man was knocking on the apartment door and he was holding a gun. My dad got up quickly and told my mom to call the police. When my dad got to the apartment, the man was going through Antonio's truck, and once he saw my dad, he booked it once again. My dad was raging. He told the police if he went further than the apartment and got anywhere near our home or went through our vehicles, he was going to shoot the man, and he was warning them now. We don't have a security system. We just lock the front door and back door, and we never felt the need to lock our vehicles until today. We do, however, have security cameras, one facing the main entrance, our vehicles, one right by the front door, and one facing the area where our cattle and 2 horses are. Unfortunately, my dogs are all bark and no bite. Sheba is about 7 years old and is a lab mix, and Sombra is almost 2 and she's a red heeler. The dogs are mostly on our porch watching the cattle and barking at whatever or whoever comes through the main entrance. But I think now my old-school Mexican parents are going to have to finally invest in a security system instead of thinking a locked door and the porch light will scare anything away. I moved to a new place in a small rural town in Texas. Little did I know that the house next to ours was a halfway house for registered offenders. I ran a non-profit wildlife rescue at that time and had actually a couple of them do community service at my place. It was not so bad. I figured I'd rather go with it than dreading it, as keeping your enemies closer sort of thing. They had a history with children, and I'm an adult woman, so I didn't feel threatened from that angle, and it gave me a chance to keep an eye on them to make sure they don't get close to any kids, at least not in my presence. But then a third guy moved in, and he was just utterly weird. He often mumbled to himself, would never answer or say hi, just creepy vibes all over. One morning he walked by my property, stopped and pet my dog through the fence, saw me and looked me up and down as if trying to figure something out. I smiled at him and said, "Isn't it a beautiful morning?" He looked at me as if I was talking gibberish, shrugged and walked off to the park about a mile away, where he approached a young mother who was sitting on a bench watching her kids play, and stabbed her in the back, paralyzing her for life, for no reason at all. I can't help but wondering if he would have come after me had I not been behind a fence with a 160-pound Great Dane directly in front of me, and I've linked the full story right below here. So this happened when I was around 8 years old. I would have thought it was something I made up if other kids I grew up with didn't have a memory of this person too. I grew up in one of those everybody knows everybody small towns where you definitely know if someone doesn't live there. As I said, I was around 8. I went to the park one summer day and saw a young girl there. She looked to be about a year younger than me and she was alone, but I had never met her or saw her before this day. It didn't take us long to get to know each other and start playing together, but I never realized she never told me her name. A little while into our playing, we see a man slowly approach us from the other side of the park. My new friend spots him and starts to look uncomfortable and walks away before he spots her. The last thing she ever said to me was, "My name isn't Summer." I thought it was weird since she didn't tell me what it was, just that it wasn't Summer. The man reaches me and asks me if I had seen the girl, who he said was his daughter, Summer. I looked around the park and didn't see her, so I told a half-truth and said no. He eyed me for a second and then said his goodbyes and left. I saw him looking around the park as he left and instantly ran home. I never thought of this after that day until the memory popped in my head. I consulted Facebook and, sure enough, my childhood friends remembered her too. To this day, I don't know what the situation really was. I regret never telling my parents, though I know they wouldn't have believed me living in the small town I do. I pray for her every now and then and really hope that whoever she is, she's okay. Just a quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and everyone who's lived there knows it's very busy and noisy all day. The rip of buses, traffic, businesses everywhere, but at night it gets really quiet and very eerie sometimes. This story is about an incident that happened to me when I was 15 and got my first job at McDonald's, and it gives me chills every time I think about it. I was 15 and just got hired at McDonald's down the street from where I live. It was perfect because I could get to and from work without having to worry about getting a ride from my parents. While working there, I met some kids my age that I became close with. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest of kids. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers, and typical 90s punks. I slowly started to become like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which was totally unlike me, but I was always the type that didn't have many friends, so I wanted to fit in. Side note, I was very sheltered growing up and didn't really get around much because my parents were very overprotective of me. One night at around 10 p.m., I finished watching Monday Night Raw and went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and hear my dad's footsteps. He wore those slippers that tap loudly on the tile floor. "Chris, I've asked you all day to take out the trash. They come tomorrow, so do it now." Now, normally I would have taken it out the first time he asked, but now that I was getting older and becoming very rude, I didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. "I work now and go to school. You take it out," I replied. My dad's eyes got wide as I've never seen them before. He leaned in and said softly, "As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave." I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking the trash out, I rebelled like the dumb teen I was. "Fine, I'll leave. If you're going to kick me out for that, don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house," I said as I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, and they weren't. Just the maintenance guy finishing up the cleaning. Of course, of all nights, it was raining, so I had to find somewhere to go to stay that was dry. There was a bridge with an overpass a little ways down the street, so I started walking towards it. The whole time I'm regretting what I did and wished I just took out the freaking trash. I finally get to the bridge and I climbed up the hill to the little section in the corner to stay out of view. I remember in school learning to go here in case of a tornado, so I knew I was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming that my parents would call the cops, which, in my mind, would show me that they cared. Hours go by, and nothing. No sirens, no cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold, but I promised myself I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and fell asleep. I woke up violently from a semi wailing on his horn over the overpass. I looked all around confused. How long was I out for? I looked towards McDonald's and saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird. He was sitting still, facing forward. I assumed it must be like 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus. And I stood up very upset that my parents never tried to find me and began walking to the bus stop. Now I'm a very outgoing person and I trust my gut. As I walked closer to the old guy, I didn't get any negative vibe as I approached him. He slowly turned his head and looked at me and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a genuine peaceful smile. I smiled back and decided instead of going home, maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he'd mind if I sat down, and he smiled and gestured towards the seat. "Is everything okay?" he said with concern. "Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day," I said. I began telling him the story, and I noticed as the time went by, he was becoming more and more anxious, and his smile began turning into a frown. He began to start breathing loud, and he cut me off dead-sentence and said, "You need to go home now," with a stern voice. I was confused. I figured maybe his bus was coming soon and he wanted to say that before he left. I looked down in frustration because that's not what I wanted to hear. Suddenly I felt a strong grasp on my arm. He grabbed me and looked me dead in the eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point, bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally thrown off guard by his complete switch in his persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes. "You need to go home now," he screamed at me. At this point, this guy was starting to scare me, so I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured my mom was already up making coffee, so my plan of sneaking back in the house and hiding in the basement was not going to happen. So to see if she'd be up, I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. My heart stopped and my throat became dry. Why was that man at the bus stop at 1:30 a.m. when the buses aren't running? I turned back towards him to look at him, and he was gone. Now I'm scared, confused, and I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house. I opened the door quietly and everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under bags of clothes so they wouldn't find me. Figured I could get some sleep. The image of that guy kept popping in my head and I was so freaked out. It just didn't make sense. Just then I heard loud sirens passing by, and not just one, multiple bursts of sirens coming every 10 seconds or so. I smiled, thinking I've won. My parents called the police to look for me, and my plan worked. And now I'll make them worry until the morning and regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and covered myself up to stay hidden and fell asleep. I woke up to hearing my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little basement window and saw daylight, so I figured I'd go upstairs and get my apology. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining room table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me so tight. "I thought you were dead," she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused. "Why would you think that?" I asked. What she said next sent chills throughout my entire body. She said that last night at around 1:40 a.m., a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's. It was completely destroyed. I started breathing heavily and realized that man saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I would have been sitting there and would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me that I didn't know how to handle it, so I just hugged my mother and immediately began to sob. I apologized and realized that I missed the old me. I almost got myself killed for my own stubborn stupidity. I dropped those friends and got into a new crowd at school, and from that point on, anytime that trash was full, I just took it out. I don't know who or what that was at the bus stop, but thank you, old man, for saving my life. I'm a 23-year-old female. I live in a townhouse with my 2 children, 2 and 6 months old. My fiancé did live with us until 2 weeks ago when I caught him trying to mess with other women and made him move out. That's important to the story. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and when he did live with us, my ex worked evenings. So let me set the scene. We live in a tiny town in northern Pennsylvania. My line of townhouses sits in front of a big field that runs to a line of woods. As far as I'm aware, these woods stretch for at least a few miles, and I'm not aware of any houses in there or any roads that lead through them. My living room has 3 windows that look to the field, and my bedroom on the 2nd floor only has 1 window that faces that way as well. People do tend to walk their dogs back in the field, and kids sometimes play back there, but I rarely ever see anyone close to my house. For that reason, I tend to leave my blinds and curtains open because I guess I just enjoy the view. So in July of 2019, I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep. All the lights were off, but I had my window and blinds open since it was so warm. I was looking out the window and I noticed small red and white lights just outside. I got up and looked to realize that the lights were coming from a drone. I ran downstairs to where my fiancé of the time was sitting in the living room and ran to the window. I told him what I saw, but of course, when he went to look, it was gone. I was paranoid that the drone could have had a camera on it and someone was watching me with it. I kept my blinds closed for a while after that. Fast forward to January of this year, I guess I stupidly got comfortable and assumed that whoever it was flying the drone was a one-time creep. My blinds were open and I had just gotten out of the shower. I was sitting on my bed pretty much naked except for my underwear, scrolling on my phone when out of the corner of my eye I saw lights again out of the dark window. It was that freaking drone again. I ran out of the room and waited for a few minutes. I peeked back into my room and it was gone. I quickly shut my blinds and got dressed. Honestly, I felt sick at how stupid I was to leave my window open again, especially when I was practically naked. Now for the really disturbing part. My 2-year-old son and I were out in the field 2 weeks ago, 3 days after I kicked out my boyfriend playing ball. I had my 6-month-old strapped to me in a baby carrier. Probably about a half hour after we had been out there, I heard a slight whirring noise coming toward us. I looked up and saw that drone flying towards us. I looked around and didn't see anyone. It stopped right over us. I freaked and grabbed my son and dragged him into the house, looking back at the tree line every so often as we went. I knew they had to be hiding in there. I went inside, closed the blinds, and called my mom and told her about the situation. She told me to just keep an eye out, and I said I would. My son likes to line his toys up along the windowsill, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to open them up just an inch or so. A little while later, after we ate dinner and it was almost dark, I was feeding my 6-month-old and my son was playing. He was standing over by the window, lining up his toys, and he started saying, "Dada." I assumed he was just missing his father and dismissed him by saying he was going to see him that weekend. He kept saying "Dada" over and again, though, and I looked up and saw him pointing to the window, under the gap that the blinds didn't cover. I froze. I remembered that he calls any man with facial hair Dada because it reminds him of his father, but there was no way someone would be bold enough to actually come up to my window. Not when my neighbors are literally right there. Anyone could see them. But there aren't any lights back there, so unless someone actually stepped out of their house, I guess nobody would see them. Maybe it was my ex. But he should be at work at that time. I ran to the window and moved my son. I didn't want to lift the blinds, but honestly, I was sure it had to be the person who had been creeping on me from the past year, and I wanted to see who it was. I pushed the blinds up and was looking at a man, who I definitely had never seen before, crouching in front of me. He was bald with a mustache and goatee. I have no idea how old he was. He could have been anywhere from 30 to 50. When he saw me, he smiled and stood up. I yelled and told him that I was calling the cops. He just stood there, smiling at me like some freak. I was about to close the blinds again when he said something I couldn't hear. I told him to leave again, and he said louder this time, "I just want to talk to you." I shook my head no and yelled the same thing to him. He started slapping his hands on the window, yelling, "No, no, no," over and over. I grabbed my phone, scared he was going to try to break in. I dialed 911. My kids were crying from the yelling, and I felt on the verge of tears. I told the operator what was going on. The whole time I was on the phone, the man was pounding on my window, screaming now. He was yelling all kinds of nonsense, and I only caught some of it. He said he was watching me for months. I'm beautiful. He wants me to come with him. He'll kill my children if I don't. The operator told me to go into an upstairs room and hide until the police arrive. My town doesn't have a police department, so we rely on the state police. She said it would be about 20 minutes, but to stay on the phone with her. The man was practically punching my window now and was just screaming like a maniac. I was about to grab my kids and run upstairs when I heard someone else screaming. The man bolted. I looked out and saw my neighbor and his girlfriend. I opened the window, and my neighbor said that he heard the man, so he ran around the building. He said when the guy heard him, he ran back to the woods and disappeared in the tree line. They said that they also called the police. I thanked them 100 times. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a quick search around the building and in the trees, but obviously didn't find anything. I've been super paranoid since then and stayed at my parents' a few nights after it happened. I don't know why that guy targeted me or why he waited so long to do something. I'm just happy my neighbors were there to intervene, or who knows what would have happened. I was between the ages of 7 to 10. I lived in a very haunted house on an Indian reservation. We would often see shadow figures, hear toys in my room going off by themselves, toilets flushing by themselves. None of my friends would ever stay the night because of all the creepy stuff that happened and the feeling of always being watched. The only person who ever stayed with me was my cousin, as she basically lived at our house on weekends. One night, as we were trying to go to sleep, I was looking at my toy shelf and I could see everything since my room was pretty bright from the moon. One of my dolls that was sitting straight up started to scoot itself back. 1, 2, 3. As I lay in bed watching it, the doll's head turned slowly towards me, and I quickly closed my eyes, hoping it didn't know I was awake. It turned its head back and tried to scoot forward, but wasn't able to. Then it just stopped. During that moment, I felt like I held my breath forever, waiting for it to move again. I called out to my cousin to see if she was awake, and, "Did you see that?" My cousin whispered, "Yeah. Can we go to your mom's room?" In that moment, I jumped up, flipped the lights on, and ran to my mom's room. I experienced a lot of creepy things in that house, but nothing ever compared to that. I think it was because my older sister played with Ouija boards in that room and didn't know the rules, but that's another story. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and happy birthday, Emily Clark.